Let's queue it up with some Hex TCG. My favorite. Play a game. We're going to 2-2 in this gauntlet with Uzzu Cannon. God, and that queued instantly. God bless it. If you're a Magic player in the audience who's taken off, I'd like to say thanks for hanging out for as long as you did. If you're a Magic player in the audience interested in checking out Hex, I have a good resource for checking out this here. Kind of explain some of the differences between the game. I'm going to talk through some of them as we play though. So my opening hand here, we only have one. Shards are the resource in this game. We only have one of them in this opening hand, so we're going to have to take a mulligan here. The deck that I'm playing is kind of a ramp combo deck. The UI improved by 10 years and 10 seconds, right? It sounds like my youngest is awake. I'm going to go. Usually he just needs his binky put back in his mouth. I'm going to go put a binky back in his mouth really quick, and then we will battle. We'll be right back, folks. Just a minute. Resources. Oh, wrong color resources. Alright, I think this is a keep at 5. And my oldest went to bed super early last night, so it's about 5 a.m. here and he's awake. Good times. So my opponent here has played a 1/1 that you saw an animation go towards the top of his deck. So when this card came into play, it added a line of text to the next action in my opponent's deck. So the next action my opponent's play is going to draw a card in addition to all the other effects that it has. So it's basically a 1/1 for one that cantrips kind of delayed. It draws a card later. Sorry about that. I was pulling my oldest out of bed. You can see here one of the things that's different. That's different about this game too. One of the primary differences is each player has a champion. If you notice, my opponent and I each had different starting life totals. So I had 23 life and my opponent had 22. And we each have these champions that have different activated abilities. As you play your resources, you can activate these abilities with the charges that you get. So my opponent's ability creates a 1/1 with flight and speed. It's called a Bumblebot. And then my ability gives me a threshold of my choice. So basically it helps fix my colors. The game's really sweet. Alright, well, there's Chlorophilia. So this hand's working out pretty well. So Chlorophilia is a 2-cost that pulls a wild shard out of my deck and plays it for me. And then I can play this. So you can see here, I've got four resources total on here. I've got 2 available, and I've got 2 Sapphire Threshold and 2 Wild Threshold. I'm going to go ahead and play this Wellspring out here. And this card is kind of an X accelerant, so for 2XX, I gain 1 resource and one threshold of my choice. Just in a stream step, so I can pick up viewers by pledging. Yeah, I think so too. I know that was one of the results of the lawsuit, is the champions originally all had 20 life, but I think having them have variable life total is really cool. It's a nice balancing mechanic for the game. So the champions' life totals range from, I believe it's 16 is the lowest, all the way up to 26, depending on what their different abilities do. So this card in my hand is a 5/6, and when it comes into play, I can have it battle 2 target opposing troops. The 2 is important there because this can only fight things if my opponent has 2 things on their side of the table. Eternal Sage, this is a 5/5 for 5, that's a shardless card, it's an artifact, and whenever I gain a threshold, it does something different based on what type of threshold I got. So it can pump a troop, it can exhaust something and not let it come undone, it can deal damage, it can gain life, it can discard cards off the top of their deck. But I'm actually going to play my Cheese Smythe out here. This card is really sweet. So what this card does, it's a 2/3 with lethal, so any amount of damage that it deals kills a troop. And at the start of every one of my turns, it creates a random cheese and puts it into my hand. And there are 3 different random cheeses that do different things. And then every time this deals damage to my opponent, the cheese ferments and then gets -1 cost. But like the cheeses that this creates aren't cards that you can actually put in your deck to start. They're cards that you can only be played by being created by cards like Cheesesmith. So at the start of my turn here, you're going to see we're going to get a random cheese. And we got a Kraken Barrel Cheddar, which puts a card from any crypt, my opponent's or mine, back into my hand. I'm going to go ahead and ship with my Artisanal Cheesesmith here. If my opponent doesn't block, you'll see my Kraken Barrel Cheddar will get a reduced cost. And he did block, so that means my cheese does not go down in cost. It stays at 6. My Cheese Smythe has to deal damage to my opponent in order to reduce the cost of cheese in my hand. Play my Eternal Sage out. We know some of the rough results of the lawsuit settlement. The champion life totals changed. They changed the name of a few cards. Booster packs now have 17 cards in them instead of 15. I was not a Kickstarter backer, so I do not have any of those special goodies. Yes, you can put your opponent's cards into your own hand. You can sell gold to other players in Hex for Platinum. So I'm going to go ahead and play. So my opponent's deck, my opponent was a 2-color deck that was missing their second shard, so they didn't really have a lot going on that game. Even though we mulliganed, we were able to play our threats out, and they weren't. I'm going to go ahead and take this Succulent Cluckodon and this Carnosaurus. My opponent's deck is an aggressive deck, so having these troops that gain life, this card's actually super powerful. Like, aggro decks wouldn't exist in Magic if cards like this existed. It's a 2-cost, 2/2 that gains you 2 life whenever something battles, and it battles something when it comes into play. I don't hate the Chompasaur. This is a card that's a 4/4 with Crush that destroys an artifact or constant, and my opponent's champion ability makes artifacts. Aborian Root Father is really kind of clunky in this matchup. My opponent's deck is kind of lower to the ground, so these more expensive cards I kind of want to board out. The Hex client you can download from hexccg.com, or since this is a real video game, you can search for it on Steam. Search for Hex Shards of Fate on Steam. Yeah, his seer suggests some form of prophecy burn. I think I'm going to... The Cheesmith is medium in this matchup. I think I'm actually going to trim him. He doesn't block a ton of things while they have 3/2s. It does run better than Magic Online. And this game, it officially supports Windows and OS X, and the client works fine on my Linux computer through Wine, which is great. God, we're just having so many color issues today. This hand's so good. So this shard's really neat design. So it's a colorless shard, so when you play it, or a shardless shard, when you play it for a resource, it doesn't give you a threshold, but you can cycle it by paying 3 and then gain a threshold of your choice. But it doesn't make a wild to start, so I think I have to draw again. Just need wild in my opening hand. Yeah, this hand's fine. So that was a good draw. This is a 1-drop accelerant, so when it comes into play, it gives me a wild threshold to use, and then I can exhaust it to gain a resource until end of turn. Is there a foil equivalent in this game? We don't have premium cards yet, right? I don't think those exist quite. We have extended art cards. Donated 516 palindrome hype. Thank you for that. I appreciate the donation. So this is a neat card, Rage Fire. So this deals 2 damage to something, and then this puts itself back into my opponent's deck, and then all copies of Rage Fire in my opponent's deck deal 2 more damage. So the next Rage Fire my opponent plays is going to deal 4 points of damage. And the neat thing about full art cards in Hex is because it's a digital game, you can just right-click on the full art cards and say, okay, what's the actual text on this, and it'll zoom out and show you what the text is still. So this is again another prophecy card. So this is a 3-cost delayed draw 3. The next action, resource, and troop in my opponent's deck's gain when you play this draw card. So he's going to draw 3 cards off of this card, but they're kind of like draws down the road. I like to say, draws in the bank basically. My opponent activated his champion ability, which he didn't get to do last game, which put a Bumblebot into play. So I'll go ahead and play a resource out here. And then I can't play a 5 or a 6 yet because I only have 4 resources. But this Wellspring now, I can play this for X is 2. So 4 total and gain 2 additional resources. So I'll jump from 4 to 6 here. Hopefully my toddler's going to behave when he's done with his breakfast. Alright. You just need a second screen or a cell phone to put my stream up on. So Chompy here is going to get frisky. We can go ahead and play him out. And when this comes into play, it destroys an artifact or a constant, and this is an artifact troop. So we're going to destroy this Bumblebot and gain 2 life, because we gain life equal to the artifact's cost. Play this wild shard out, pass the turn. One of the things I really like about this game that's done, and it's just a simple interface thing, this says you may destroy target artifact or constant. What this does differently is that instead of asking me to target something and then say, do you want to destroy this? Yes, no. This asks me, do you want to destroy something, and then targets it. So if you don't want to kill something, it's less clicks. So my opponent cast another Rage Fire there, which dealt 4 to kill my Chompasaur, because like I said, the next one was going to deal 4. And Now, the next time my opponent draws a Rage Fire, it's going to deal 6 damage. This card's really obnoxious. So it's Prophesied, so it draws a card when he plays it, and has Flight and Speed and a mechanic called Rage 1. So every time this card attacks, it permanently gains +1 power. And at the end of my opponent's turn, this goes back to their hand if they played an action this turn. If they didn't play an action, it just dies. Is there any sort of land destruction? So there are cards that destroy your opponent's resources in this game, but those cards, what's the word I'm looking for? The cards that destroy your opponent's resources don't destroy their thresholds, which means you can't color screw people, which is the most powerful part of land destruction in Magic. Alright, so I played my Eternal Sage out here. I think we're just going to pass the turn here. Transmograph. So this transforms a troop into a random different troop or artifact that costs 1 less. So he transformed my 5/5 into a 3/2. So I wasn't sure which variation of the McBombus deck my opponent was playing last game because they kind of mulliganed a little bit and then they didn't really get to play many cards out. So I'm definitely not reserved in an optimal way for beating the deck that my opponent's playing. I don't have any answers to this Flickering Gobbler in my deck right now, and I would like to have some of those for the next game for sure. This game going to esport itself, possibly at some point. They had a $100,000 cash tournament earlier this year that was invite only, 16 players, and all 16 of those players, qualified by playing tournaments in client. And they're supposed to be announcing another set of cash tournaments like that later this year as well. Yeah, we're gonna bring in Transmog for Game 3, and I actually have a Gale Force on the sideboard still that we can bring in. Yeah, I'm just gonna go ahead and concede. So Chompasaur and Carnosaur are less good against the build that has Knob Gobbler in it. I'm gonna bring in the Transmografades and the Gale Force. Possibly a Lullaby. I don't think I want the Lullaby. Eternal Sage is less good against this version too. Bring in 1 Lullaby. Yeah, MTG thresholds are, the threshold mechanic has nothing to do with hex thresholds. So thresholds are basically your amount of colors. So when I play this resource out, it gives me a resource and a wild threshold. The threshold, like this card, for instance, takes 1 resource to cast and requires I have 1 wild threshold. This card takes 5 resources to cast and requires me to have 3 wild thresholds. This card takes 4 to cast, requires me to have 2 wild thresholds. This hand's a little bit greedy, but I'm going to keep it. We've only got 1 shard, but we've got 2 accelerants here. We're on the play, so my opponent has to have exactly burn to kill this Howling Brave. I guess he could have Transmog too. We should have seen as that in the other game. Knob Gobbler, yep. Stream's going well, Anthony. Oh, don't burn my Howling Brave. I'm greedy. Zygamot's game. Oh, that does it too. So Zygamot's game destroys a random artifact or troop, and then if it kills his own card, that goes back to his hand. Now we're under the gun and need to draw a shard right away. And we drew a shard right away because I'm a professional. Let me go ahead and play Wellspring for 1 and get up to 3 shards. And if we just like draw shards for the next 3 to 4 turns, we'll be super happy. Oh, was it 12? Okay, you're right, it was 12. The next one's going to be 24 players, though, I believe, right? They haven't formally announced details, but the whisperings have been 24 players. Shard will be really good here. Look at that. God, I'm so good at this today. Yeah, shards are basically lands. They're your resources that allow you to play your cards. So now I've got 4 resources and 4 wild thresholds, so I can play out my Succulent Cluckodon. And when this card comes into play, I gain 4 life, and I may have it battle target troop that costs 1. Thresholds do not go away. And as you use up your resources, they replenish at the beginning of your next turn. So I fight as 1 drop, and I gain 4 life, and now I have this giant fatty 4/4 on the table. Look, both helps, but if you have to pick only one, definitely pick lucky every time. Ideally, you are both. My opponent casts Rage Fire, targeting my dome, which allows him so... Oh, he's not activating it. Oh, because he probably doesn't want to get Champa Sword. Oh, he's activating it. Okay. So my opponent's ability requires him to have played an action in order to activate it. Okay, well, attack with my Succulent Cluckodon. This card is a quick action that deals 2 damage to each troop with flying, and it has a mechanic called Empower. So if I click this button, it'll double every number on this card. So instead of being a 2 cost that deals 2 damage to each troop with flight, it'll turn into a 4 cost that deals 4 damage to each troop with flight. Cluck duckin'. Zygamot's game, so he gets to destroy a random thing, kill my guy. Alright, and there's the Knob Gobbler again. So he's going to get to attack here, and I'm just going to go ahead and Gale Force this and kill this thing now. It could be, we could get more value out of that if he plays more Gobblers later or something, or like activates his ability, but I really just kind of just want to preserve my life total. Alright, we get a Wild Shard, and this thing could battle something, but I just want to get my 5/6 into play and just start attacking. And this card's super sweet, so his rules text here is in the form of a poem, but what this card does, it's 6 cost 1/2, but when this comes into play, we draw cards equal to the highest power among troops we control, and gain life equal to the highest defense among troops we control. So he Raged Fire this, and he's going to burn it now, too. Yep, so I spent 2 cards to kill my 5/6. There aren't any tax cards in Hex currently. I'm going to go ahead and play my second Croc out, and hopefully he doesn't kill this one, and then I get to Balthazar and draw 5 and gain 6 next turn. And that'll probably put the game away. If he can't kill this, and we get to Balth it, that'll be nuts. What you got? Now, my opponents cast 2 Rage Fires now, which means if my opponent gets another Rage Fire, they're going to be able to use it to kill this Croc, because the 3rd Rage Fire does 6. Alright, sweet. So that means he's not killing my Crocosaur, which means we're going to have to gain a bunch of life and draw a bunch of cards next turn. I probably shouldn't have held this Shard in my hand. I'm not sure what I was thinking. Yeah, they're definitely hate bears, but they're not like tax bears to split hairs a little bit. Let's go ahead and play my Balthazar out here. We'll go up to 28 and draw 5 cards. Nom 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 nom. Such value, much wow. Draw all of these cards. Attack for 5. So I can demonstrate another one of the really sweet things that Hex does. So this is a customizable card. So this is a 2/2 with 2 sockets in it. So when I'm building my deck, I can choose different abilities to enhance this card with, basically. And when I'm sideboarding or reserving, as we call it in Hex, I can adjust these gems if there's different gems that are better for the particular matchup that I'm playing. So this card is a base 2/2, and the gems I have in this make it Spell Shield, which means it can't be targeted by my opponent's effects, and it has the ability, when it comes into play, it deals damage equal to its power to an opposing champion. Blah, 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 blah. Sorry for the mush mouth there. So this card requires a Sapphire threshold to play it. So you see I can't play this currently. So I'm going to go ahead and activate Uzzu. It's the first time I've activated this. And what Uzzu does is she allows me to get a threshold of my choice. So basically, the deck I'm playing is like a mono wild deck. And we're splashing the Sapphire card with a Ruby gem in it. And while I was talking there, I made a mistake. I definitely should have gotten a Ruby threshold with this because I have this dual shard in my hand that gives Sapphire threshold. So pretty sizable mistake, actually. I'm going to go ahead and play this Eternal Sage out. And Eternal Sage says every time we gain a threshold, we get a different mechanic. Activate this, and when I gain a wild threshold with Eternal Sage, I get to give something +3/+3, so we'll give Balthazar +3/+3. Go ahead and attack for 9 here. We've got enough fatty booms on the table that I think we're probably going to take this game down. Don't even really need my Azure Fate Sorceress, just play my 5 power idiots and crash on in. So the deck I'm playing right now is kind of a ramp combo deck. We haven't seen the combo aspect of it. It involves this Azure Fate Sorceress. Hopefully we'll see it at some point. Oh, that's the third Rage Fire, so it deals 6 and kills my Sage. Still have a good amount of power on the table, though. So I'm going to go ahead and cycle this Shard Prism, and when I cycle it, I get to gain a threshold. I get to gain a threshold of my choice. So I'm going to gain this Ruby threshold. And now I can go ahead and... how do I want to sequence this? I'm going to play this Prism out, actually, which puts me to 5 resources. Then I'm going to play this Chlorophyll out, which puts me to 3, but it plays a resource from my deck, which puts me back to 4. And I can play this Azure Fate Sorceress out, which when this comes into play, it deals damage equal to its power to my opponent. So it's going to come into play and do 2 to my opponent. And we'll go ahead and attack for... I think the attack with Balthazar is free here. If he wants to eat the Balthazar with his 3/2, he's taking 5 from the Croc, which I'm okay with. There is actually a 5-color Uzzu control deck that's one of the better decks in the constructed format right now. Renlock and Prophecy Burn instead of the Ancients. Why not both would be my question. I think they both seem reasonable. Like maybe 2 Ancients. I'd probably go 3/2. I think you could play 1 more troop in the deck. I don't think you want more than 2 Archmages in the deck. These are my fatties. Can you do anything? Can you do nothing about my fatties? He's got a Phoenix here that probably has to stay on defense. So this card is a 4/2 with flight and speed that he can remove 6 actions from his crypt and replay it. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and play the second Azure Fate Sorceress out, and this one gets inspired by this other one, so this card shares its ability with the other things that come into play. So in addition to having her own ability, she gets the one from my other... one. So she deals damage equal to her power twice, once from her own and once from the other one. So he goes to 6. And then we attack with everything, and he's forced to throw his Phoenix under the Croc. Is there deck limits? GG's opponent. And there's actually a card in Hex called Jankbot that you can only play in your deck if there's 150 or more cards in your starting deck. We're 3/2 in this gauntlet now, which is awesome. It means we've broken even. So if you go at least 3/3, you end up breaking even in your gauntlet. Word on the street is set 7 things are going to start rotating card-wise, but we don't have any official. They haven't published anything official on that. So we'll have 6 sets legal at a time. Alright, so this opponent is playing Boros Blastforge, which obviously we can't know for sure what deck they're playing, but generally... Generally, this champion is a tempo-based champion that plays Sapphire and Wild. We know they're playing Sapphire at least because their champion requires Sapphire to activate. This hand I have doesn't have any acceleration in it, and the first play is a 5-drop, so we're going to go ahead and mulligan this. This hand has an accelerant and a 4-drop in it, so it seems great. We'll get Wild on 1 with this. We'll play Chlorophylia on 2 off of this. Hopefully we draw a shard or 2 between now and then. They're very likely playing the Runeer Hierophant Boris Blast Forge deck, which is nice. Again, you've heard me, if you've seen me stream Hex before, you know I love the fact that I get this information on what deck my opponent's playing, just, you know, based on the champion that they are, which is great. Play this out. Play Chlorophylia. Yep. So the deck my opponent's playing is likely one of the two, considered one of the 2 best decks in the format, the Boris Blast Forge, and then the deck my last opponent was playing is also considered one of the other of the 2 best decks, the McBombus decks. And each of them, people always ask about cost of the best decks. They're about 100 USD if you wanted to build them. He has the Keitel. So this card prophesied into my opponent's deck, and it says, when this enters play, the next troop in your deck gets -2 cost. So I'm going to go ahead and play this wild chart out here. And I'm going to go ahead and activate my champion ability to gain our Ruby threshold, so my Azure Fate Sorceress is online. So Azure Fate Sorceress comes into play, deals 2 damage to my opponent. How do they make the cards have value? Same way Magic cards have value. There's rarity when you open packs and stuff, and they're only available in so much. And there's an auction house and a free market, so people can buy, sell, and trade. And whatever price people are set at, supply and demand works itself out. So Wrathwood, Master Moss. This card's really sweet. So this card is a combo with the Azure Fate Sorceress that we have here, in play. So this card comes into play. It gets inspired by my Azure Fate Sorceress, so it deals damage equal to its power to my opponent. And then what this card does is, when this dies, it turns into a 2/2, and when this 2/2 deals damage to my opponent, it turns back into a 5/5, which means that this card, because it deals damage equal to its power when it comes into play, as soon as it turns into the 2/2, it immediately flips back into the 5/5. So this card is basically unkillable unless my opponent finds a way to void it when it would go to the crypt. Opponent was stuck on shards there, so they conceded. So in this matchup, I like to bring in the Mass Poly Dinglers. This is a one-sided sweeper. It's expensive, but we're a ramp deck, so we can get to it. It turns every troop my opponent has in play and in their hand into these little pus monkey, pus horses, 0/1s that are useless. And then Lullaby is a fog effect that also has this text that says revert the troop. So it basically restores them to their base state. So any modifiers they've gained go away. So Lullabies come in. Arborean Rootfather and Eye of Creation are a little bit clunky against this more aggressive deck. And Crocosaur, my opponent's best troops are going to have Spell Shield, so I'm going to cut at least 1 Crocosaur, I think. Actually, I'm going to cut 2 and bring in an extra Cluckadon. I think I like Clucky in this matchup. Transmog, I don't really like Transmog in this matchup. They don't always have Windsinger. If I see Windsinger, I might bring in a couple of Transmog, but without seeing Windsinger, I don't like it against most of the other troops in their deck. They don't have like one individually powerful troop, aside from the Runeer Hierophant. Gale Force is only good for a very small window, and I want cards that are a little bit more flexible than that on average, I think. So this hand, so these dual shards, you see they say 0/1. Kind of think of these as a come into play tapped land. They don't make a resource the turn we play them, so they're a little bit slow. So I'm going to go ahead and play out the Shard of Instinct here. And then next turn, we play out the Shard Prism that's colorless, and then we play Chlorophylia, and then play a Howling Brave. So this hand's got a ton of acceleration in it, which is great because it means we can just like play any of the fatty boom booms that we draw off the top. like Wrathwood Master Moss and this Eternal Sage. So go ahead and play Chlorophilia, which gives us a resource. Because it's playing a resource, we get that temporary resource to use right away. So we get our Howling Brave out here, which is another accelerant. Activate it to gain a resource. My opponent during my end step played a Quick Troop. So one of the things in this game is Quick is a super type, basically. So they can staple Quick onto any type of card, which means you can play it anytime you have priority, not just on your turn. So you can attack for 3 here, that's fine. Ruiner Hierophant. So this is one of the more format-defining cards in Hex right now. It's a 2/2 that's customizable, and the gems my opponents put in theirs is Spell Shield, like the one I have in my Azure Fate Sorcerers, and whenever this deals damage to your opponent, create a 3/3 Crush Rhino. This combos with the Ruiner Hierophant because every time another troop comes into play under my opponent's control, this gets +1/+1 permanently. So other troops make it bigger, and when it hits me, it gets bigger because it makes rhinos when it hits me. And go ahead and activate this, and I just drew Azure Fate Sorceress this turn, so I've actually assembled our combo now, so I'm going to go ahead and activate this. And I already had the Wrathwood Master Moss, so we'll get our Sapphire and activate my Howling Brave and play out this Azure Fate Sorceress. Hopefully, my troops coming into play and dealing damage from my Azure Fate Sorceress to my opponent will be able to race this Ruiner Hierophant, but we'll see. It's also possible I'm supposed to just play out the Cluckadon or the Wrathwood Master Moss this turn so I can block this Ruiner Hierophant. Because if my opponent plays even one troop, this Hierophant's going to grow to a 3-power guy, and I really don't want to just throw my Azure Fate away to block. In fact, even if he just attacks with it as a 2/2, I don't think I'm blocking. And my opponent actually doesn't want to give me the option to block, so my opponent's champion ability, for 2 charges gives one of his cards Flight. So now I can't block this card, and it's going to be able to ship in. I'm assuming he's attacking with both here because he's happy to trade these. Yeah, and I'm just going to take 5 here. And when this deals damage to me, you're going to see my opponent's going to get a Rhino created, which is a 3/3 with Crush. The created cards in this game, unlike tokens in Magic, can get returned to your hand, they can go to the crypt, they can get voided, etc. All these different things. So go ahead and play the Cluckadon here. I'm playing the Cluckadon first because my opponent's representing counter magic, which can interrupt one of my cards. And I'd much rather he interrupt the Cluckadon than interrupt one of my Wrathwood Master Mosses. This does 4 damage to my opponent when it comes into play, and my opponent doesn't have any 1-cost troops, so it can't fight anything. Go ahead and pass the turn back here. My opponent can activate his champion ability again to make his Ruiner Hierophant larger yet again and just keep on pressuring me. Now he can't attack with his 3/3s profitably because I have a 4/4, which is nice. I wonder if he actually has a counter magic. He might have just decided this wasn't worth counter magicking. Well, we're going to jam the Wrathwood Master Moss because that's all we got. Yep, and he has the counter magic. So this card's really gross. So not only does it stop the card that my opponents put on the stack, but every other card with the same name as Wrathwood Master Moss is going to cost 2 more now. So this one in my hand, you see it has a red 6 now. This next one's going to cost me 6 to play out. Whoa, that's fine. We're losing this game anyways. We were. The attack button was right. Yep. Just gonna concede there and move on with our day. Take the next game on the play. That was completely a misclick. Man, it's late. Early. It's late. You know, one of the two. We're in hour 19 right now. Hour 18. Almost hour 19, getting close. Scoop of shame. Oh, this hand's so good with a second resource. Alright, we'll be disciplined in mulligan. This hand is also very good with a second resource. Ah! Come on, Kismet. I didn't want our gauntlet to end like this. Not like this. Not like this. Oh, that's fine. He had so many 3/3s, and like I couldn't block his other thing next turn. We did not draw a shard. Okay. Yeah, the game was mostly over. Yeah, we're gonna find a new deck.